As I prepared for my sermon this Sunday, I realized that we all have questions. Some of those questions are simply curiosities, like why is the sky blue kind of stuff, or why do we drive on parkways but park on driveways, or if you tied butter toast to the back of a cat and then dropped it, would it land on the cat's feet or on the butter side of the toast? Or did Adam and Eve have belly buttons? Those kind of odd curiosities. Other questions are a bit deeper and more meaningful. Things like, why is there suffering in the world? Or what's the meaning of life? Did the universe just explode into existence without cause or design? Or were we created for a purpose? Is there a God? And does He really care about us? And as Christians, we not only wrestle with these questions ourselves, but we're often questioned or approached by others who are looking for answers. And the Bible tells us in 1 Peter 3, verse 15, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. See, we live in an increasingly skeptical society. According to surveys conducted by the Pew Research Center, 20% of Americans in the age 18 to 25, so college age and just after bracket, identify themselves as non-religious, atheist, or agnostic, which is nearly double what it was just one generation ago, 20 years ago. And therefore, it's becoming increasingly important for Christians to be equipped with real answers to those big questions about God and Jesus and the Bible. And fortunately, those answers are not as elusive as we might sometimes feel. In fact, I really think that it all boils down to just three big questions, and I call them the God questions. The first is, does God exist? Is God real? The second, is Jesus God's Son? And the third, is the Bible God's Word? If we can provide compelling answers to those three questions, then not only will our own faith be strengthened and emboldened, but we'll be in a better position to share our faith confidently and convincingly with others who have those questions. So for the next 3 weeks, what I want to do is explore these questions and hopefully equip you with some solid, sensible answers, starting with that first question, does God exist? And throughout human history, people have questioned the existence of God. We can't see, we can't hear or touch or feel God, so how do we know for sure that He exists? And this question weighs so heavy on our collective conscience as society and culture throughout history that scholars and scientists and philosophers have wrestled with this and given it deep thought over the ages. Many of them have concluded that God must be real, and there are some sound reasons to believe in Him. And I'd like to share just 3 of those reasons with you today. The first is the evidence of cosmology, which is sort of a newer addition to the discussion about God. But cosmology is the study of the cosmos or the universe. And cosmology tells us not only that there is a God, but it actually tells us a little bit about Him. The passage that Angie read earlier in Psalm 19, 1 through 4, the Bible says, "The heavens proclaim the glory of God. The skies display His craftsmanship. Day after day they continue to speak. Night after night they make Him known. They speak without a sound or word. Their voice is never heard, yet their message has gone throughout the earth, and their words to all the world." See, the Hebrews didn't have a word in their language for universe or galaxy. And so when they spoke of the cosmos, they used the word heavens. And in the Bible, in other words, it's saying that we can look to the stars and learn about the glory and existence of God without ever even having to open a Bible. The cosmos is so big and so beautiful, and its very existence raises the question, how did the universe get here? The 17th century philosopher G.W. Leibniz observe, the first question which should rightly be asked is, why is there something rather than nothing? Why is there anything at all in existence rather than nothing at all in existence? And answering that question has led many scientists and philosophers to conclude that God must exist. And the reason is there's only three possible explanations for the existence of the universe. The first is that the universe is simply eternal, that it's just always existed. And prior to the 1920s, that was actually a very commonly held view, dating back as far as Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle. Most people assumed that the cosmos was static, unchanging and eternal. Since that time, however, right around the 1920s and so on, thanks to astonishing developments in modern astronomy, we now have strong scientific evidence that the universe had an absolute beginning at what's commonly referred to as the Big Bang. In the 1920s, a Russian mathematician, Alexander Friedman, and Belgian astronomer George Latimer developed models of an expanding universe based on Einstein's calculations. And these predictions were confirmed in 1929 by an American astronomer, Edwin Hubble, when he observed the red shift in light coming from distant galaxies, which indicates that they're getting further away. And as you trace this expansion of the universe backward in time, everything gets closer and closer together until you arrive at a time and a point when the distance between any 2 points is just zero. And at that point, which is often called the singularity, you've reached the absolute boundary of time and space. And the standard Big Bang model, which is almost universally accepted among astronomers and astrophysicists with slight variations here and there, thus predicts an absolute beginning to the universe. And so we no longer have any reason to think that the universe itself is eternal or it's been around forever. So another option, if it's not eternal, is that the universe simply just popped into being, uncaused from absolutely nothing. And what amazes me is that some staunch atheists, such as Lawrence Krauss, actually believe this. Common sense and scientific evidence tells us that you cannot get something from nothing. And to claim that something can literally come into being from nothing is worse than magic. When a magician pulls a rabbit out of a hat, at least you've got the magician, not to mention the hat. But nobody, I think, sincerely believes things like, say, a horse or an Eskimo village can just pop into existence without a cause. In fact, Lawrence Krauss, in his book titled A Universe from Nothing, ends up redefining nothing to be something. And so you're not getting something from nothing anymore. You're getting something from something, which is not something from nothing after all. Does that make sense? I think Maria said it well in The Sound of Music when she told Captain Von Trapp, nothing comes from nothing and nothing ever could. The conditions that hold true in our universe preclude the possibility of matter and energy just springing out of nothing with no cause whatsoever. Which leaves us with only one other possibility. If it's not eternal and if it didn't just pop into being for no reason, then the universe had to have been created by some outside cause. And whatever caused the universe has to be a transcendent cause beyond the universe itself. It existed prior to the universe. It transcends space and time since it brought space and time into existence. It must also be unimaginably powerful since it created all matter and energy. And finally, I think that it must be a personal being. And that one may not be as obvious, but the reason for that is that if the cause of the universe was just an impersonal set of circumstances that existed from eternity past, then the effect, our universe, would have to also exist from eternity past. But it didn't. Since it came into being at a specific point in time, the explanation that makes the most sense is that something or someone chose to bring the universe into existence at that particular point in time, which means that whatever created the universe must have free will and be a personal being. And therefore, we have a transcendent cause of the universe that is timeless and spaceless and unimaginably powerful and personal. And I don't know about you, but that sounds an awful lot like the God of the Bible to me. In fact, I think the Bible got it right in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 3, when it said, "For every house is built by someone, but God is the builder of everything." And just as houses don't pop into existence uncaused without a builder, neither do universes. The universe had to come from somewhere. It had to be built by someone, and thus we have our first reason to believe in God. Furthermore, we also have the evidence of creation, which is that next one there. The evidence of creation. See, from the earliest times, philosophers like Plato and Aristotle that I mentioned, wholly apart from the Bible, have concluded that God must exist based on what they perceive in the created world. And the Bible makes a remarkable claim in Romans 1 verse 20. It says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." In other words, there's no reason for us to look at the world around us and not conclude that there's a creator. Creation itself is evidence of a creator. And this is what the intelligent design movement is all about. The theory of intelligent design holds that certain features of the universe and of living things are best explained by an intelligent designer rather than random undirected processes. And the classic illustration is the watchmaker analogy. If you were walking through the desert and you stumbled upon a watch, even if you had never seen a watch before in your life, you could discern from its intricate design and inner workings that there must somewhere be a watchmaker, that this just didn't happen by accident. You can determine that this was created by someone. And similar telltale signs of design are discernible all throughout the created world. One of my favorite and a very memorable example, I think, is found in the giraffe, which you can see here. The giraffe is supposedly descended from the Climosoceras, which is a much smaller animal, a deer-sized animal, roughly 14 million years ago. And the deer, imagine that you are a newly evolved giraffe, and you're like the first of your kind. With this long, gangling neck, the average giraffe is 18 feet tall, and you take your first few steps, and you immediately keel over and die. Why? Well, because in order to get blood up that super long neck of yours into your brain, you need an enormous heart. The giraffe's heart is among the largest, most powerful in the animal kingdom. It's 2 feet wide. And so you're lying there dead, and you think, I need to evolve a heart that's so much bigger so that this doesn't happen again. And so now you've got a big, giant heart, and you're a giraffe with this long neck and this big heart, and you're walking alongside this river, and you're doing fine, and you decide to lean down and get a drink of water. And so you lean down, and all of a sudden that big heart is working with gravity instead of against it, and all the blood rushes into your head and explodes your brain, and boom, you're dead again, and you fall over. And so you're lying there dead by the little pool or whatever, and you think, I need to evolve some kind of system to keep from blowing my brains out every time I lean down for a drink of water. Giraffes have this series of valves in their neck that shut off one at a time as the giraffe bends down in order to slow down that flow of blood. But enough blood still gets past the valves that would still burst the arterioles in the brain. So that blood is then soaked up by a sponge that's sitting at the base of the brain. And so now you can bend down with your really long neck and your really big heart and your valve system and your sponge, and you can get a drink of water without blowing your brain out. But then you see a lion coming, right? And so you get up really fast and you start to run, but then you pass out immediately and you're lunch for the lion. Because, if you've ever stood up too quickly and you get that head rush feeling and you feel dizzy, imagine standing up when you're 18 feet tall. You would pass out immediately because the blood just can't get back in there quick enough. But the giraffe doesn't pass out, because as soon as the giraffe moves back up, that sponge releases an immediate dose of blood into the brain, and the valves open up one at a time just as they closed, and by the time the giraffe is up and running, his blood pressure is right back to normal. And so it's unimaginably improbable that the giraffe, descended from the Climosaurus, could have evolved all of these different pieces to the puzzle at the same time. And because if you don't have the long neck, then you don't need any of that other stuff. And if you do have the long neck, then you have to have the big heart, and you have to have the valves, and you have to have the sponge. Otherwise, you die immediately. And so all 5 of these mutations would have happened at the exact same time in order for the giraffe to survive. These are the kinds of complex, irreducibly complex systems that indicate a creator, a designer that put all of these things together at the same time and in the same place. It's not just large land animals that bear these marks either. Sir Frederick Hoyle, the English astronomer and mathematician at the Institute of Astronomy at Cambridge, who actually coined the term Big Bang Theory, once said, "The odds of even the simplest cell forming by chance are like believing that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard could assemble a Boeing 747 from the materials therein." Barrow and Tipler, 2 physicists who happened to be agnostic when they wrote this book, in their book, The Anthropic Principle, lists 10 steps in the course of human evolution, each of which is so improbable that before it could occur by chance alone, the sun would cease to be a main sequence star and incinerate the earth. They calculated the probability of the evolution of the human genome by chance alone to be 4 to the negative 180th power to the 110,000th power to 4 to the negative 360th power to the 110,000th power. And therefore, evolution, if it did occur on this planet the way biologists think it did, was literally a miracle and therefore evidence that God exists. Design necessitates a designer, and creation demands a creator. And finally, in addition to the evidence of cosmology and creation, we have the evidence of conscience. And the evidence of conscience has less to do with the material or physical world and more to do with the moral and philosophical world. I think Jiminy Cricket said it best in the 1940 classic when Pinocchio asked, "What's a conscience?" He said, "What's a conscience? I'll tell you. A conscience is that still small voice that people don't listen to." And he said, that's the problem with the world today. And to paraphrase the Blue Fairy's follow-up, your conscience is what allows you to differentiate between right and wrong, good and evil, moral and immoral. And the Bible has something to say about that too. In Romans 2, verse 14 through 15, it says, "Even though they do not have the law," that is like the law of Moses, the Old Testament, "they show that in their hearts they know what is right and wrong, just as the law commands. And they show this by their consciences. Sometimes their thoughts tell them they did wrong, and sometimes their thoughts tell them they did right." By letting our conscience be our guide, we discover another powerful reason to believe in God. Because if there is no God, then there really aren't such things as good and evil or right and wrong. There's no difference between right and wrong. The values that we hold dear, such as do not lie or do not steal or love your neighbor as yourself, they're just social conventions. You know, like driving on the right side of the road instead of the left side of the road. Or preferences, like, you know, preferring pizza over tacos or something like that. A while back, a man wrote into Dear Abby, and he says, "Dear Abby, I am in love and I am having an affair with 2 different women other than my wife. I love my wife, but I love these other women too. Please tell me what to do, but don't give me any of that morality stuff. Signed, Too Much Love for Only One." In this case, Abby's answer was classic. She wrote, "Dear Too Much Love for Only One, the only difference between humans and animals is morality. Please write to a veterinarian." And I think she's right. See, in an atheistic worldview, human beings are nothing more than highly evolved animals. You know, we're primates, and the byproduct of natural selection acting on random mutations. And our morals are simply a sort of herd mentality, you know, that evolved from social biological conditioning as a means of propagating our species. In other words, human beings just made up this concept of right and wrong and just and unjust in order to help our species survive. Human beings that morality and consciousness are just fictitious. They don't really exist. Michael Ruse, a noted philosopher of science, elaborates on that point. He writes, "The position of the modern evolutionist is that morality is a biological adaptation no less than our hands and feet and teeth. Morality is just an aid to survival and reproduction, and any deeper meaning is imaginary." So in other words, without God, there are no objective moral values, no objective moral duties, nothing. But I would contend that good and evil, right and wrong, objective moral values and duties are very real, and we all know it. You know, when this young man walked into a church in Charleston, South Carolina, and killed 9 people in order to start what he described as a race war, it was categorically wrong. It's objectively, unarguably evil. And even staunch atheists tend to agree. You know, they tend to be devout moralists. Michael Ruse, that same atheist that I just quoted a moment ago, has also said, "The man who says it is morally acceptable to rape little children is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5. And see, he believes in these morals, but he doesn't believe that morals exist because there's no God. And he just can't reconcile the two. It's clear to even non-religious people and unbelievers that some things at least are really wrong. And similarly, some things like love and equality and self-sacrifice are really good. But if good and evil exist, then God must exist. Rabbi Zacharias was once asked by a student, if there is a God, then how do you explain all the evil in the world today? And I loved his response. Ravi said, "When you say there's too much evil in the world, you assume that there's good. And when you assume that there's good, you assume that there's such a thing as a moral law on the basis of which to differentiate between good and evil. But if you assume a moral law, then you have to posit a moral law giver. But that's who you're trying to disprove and not prove. Because if there's no moral law giver, then there's no moral law. And if there's no moral law, then there's no good. And if there's no good, then there's no evil. And if there's no evil, then what was your question?" The evidence of creation and cosmology reveal a timeless, spaceless, immeasurably powerful, intelligent creator. But they don't tell us much about the character of that creator. The evidence of conscience, however, shines a light on the nature and character of that creator, namely that God is good. You know, our moral values like honesty, integrity, compassion, self-sacrifice, kindness, goodness are all grounded in the nature of God Himself. God is the source of moral rightness, and His commands, like treat others the way you want to be treated and care for orphans and widows and help the weak and don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, are reflections of His nature. God is good, and therefore we have reason to be good too. Like the psalmist, we can say in Psalm 119, verse 73, "You made me, you created me. Now give me the sense to follow your commands." You know, some people have a strong desire to believe in God. They want assurance that they're not alone in the universe, that there is something that awaits us after death. Other people have an equally strong desire not to believe in God. You know, the thought of an all-powerful creator cramps their style and limits their opportunities in life. But the decision to believe or not believe in God should be based on not on preconceptions or on what we want to believe. It ought to be based on evidence and experience and reason. And there are a lot of other reasons that I could give you to believe in God. But based on just these three, cosmology and creation and conscience, I think it takes more faith to believe that there is no God than to believe that there is. And next week, we'll try to answer the second big question, is Jesus God's Son? But in the meantime, you've got an opportunity to not only intellectually agree that God exists, but to actually personally know Him and experience Him. And all of us, even if you've believed your entire life that there is a God, maybe you just never stepped into His presence and experienced Him. But he tells us that if you will draw near to me, then I will draw near to you. So you've got a chance to do that this morning. And if I can help you with that in any way, I want to invite you to come and talk with me while we stand and sing together. Let's sing, church.